Hey friends, Miss Palmer here. We're going to read this week another chapter from Charlotte's Web, and then we're going to read a story called One Good Deed. So remember where we left off with Charlotte's Web was that Wilbur was about to go to the fair, and he's really, really excited about this because he's going to get to show off how amazing he is. And Mr. Zuckerman's really excited too, so people can see his magnificent pig. So the chapter that we're on now is called Off to the Fair. The night before the county fair, everybody went to bed early. Fern and Avery were in bed by 8. Avery lay dreaming that the Ferris wheel had snapped and that he was in the top car. Fern lay dreaming that she was getting sick in the swings. Lurvy was in bed by 8:30. He lay dreaming that he was throwing baseballs at a cloth cat and winning a genuine Navajo blanket. Mr. and Mrs. Zuckerman were in bed by 9. Mrs. Zuckerman lay daydreaming about a deep freeze unit. Mr. Zuckerman lay dreaming about Wilbur. He dreamt that Wilbur had grown until he was 116 feet long and 92 feet high, and that he had won all the prizes at the fair and was covered with blue ribbons, and even had a blue ribbon tied to the end of his tail. Down in the barn cellar, the animals, too, went to sleep early, all except Charlotte. Tomorrow would be a fair day. Every creature had planned to get up early to see Wilbur off on his great adventure. When morning came, everyone got up at daylight. The day was hot. Up the road at the Arbel's house, Fern lugged a pail of hot water to her room and took a sponge bath. Then she put her prettiest dress on because she knew she would see boys at the fair. Mrs. Arbel scrubbed the back of Avery's neck and wet his hair, parted it, and brushed it down hard until it stuck to the top of his head. All but about 6 hairs stood straight up. Avery put on clean underwear, clean blue jeans, and a clean shirt. Mr. Arbel dressed, ate breakfast, and went out and polished his truck. He even offered to drive everybody to the fair, including Wilbur. Bright and early, Lurvy put clean straw in Wilbur's crate and lifted it into the pig pen. The crate was green, and in gold letters it said, Zuckerman's Famous Pig. Charlotte had her web looking fine for the occasion. Wilbur ate his breakfast slowly. He tried to look radiant without getting food in his ears. In the kitchen, Mrs. Zuckerman suddenly made an announcement. Homer, she said to her husband, I'm going to give that pig a buttermilk bath. A what? Said Mr. Zuckerman. A buttermilk bath. My grandmother used to bathe her pig with buttermilk when it got dirty. I just remembered. Wilbur's not dirty, said Mr. Zuckerman proudly. He's filthy behind the ears, said Mrs. Zuckerman. Every time Lurvy slops him up, the food runs down around his ears, then it dries and forms a crust. He has a smudge on one side where he lays in manure, too. He lays in clean straw, corrected Mr. Zuckerman. Well, he's dirty and he's going to have a bath. Mr. Zuckerman sat down weakly and ate a donut. His wife went to the woodshed. When she returned, she wore rubber boots, an old raincoat, and carried a bucket of buttermilk and a small wooden paddle. Edith, you're crazy, mumbled Zuckerman, but she paid no attention to him. Together they walked to the pig pen. Mrs. Zuckerman wasted no time. She climbed in with Wilbur and went to work. Dipping her paddle in the buttermilk, she rubbed all over. The geese gathered around to see the fun, and so did the sheep and the lambs. Even Templeton poked his head out cautiously to watch Wilbur get a buttermilk bath. Charlotte got so interested, she lowered herself on a dangle line so she could see better. Wilbur stood still and closed his eyes. He could feel the buttermilk trickling down his sides. He opened his mouth, and some buttermilk ran in. It was delicious. He felt radiant and happy. When Mrs. Zuckerman got through and rubbed him dry, he was the cleanest, prettiest pig you ever saw. He was pure white, pink around the ears and snout, and as smooth as silk. The Zuckermans went up to change into their best clothes. Lurvy went to shave and put on his plaid shirt and a purple necktie. The animals were left to themselves in the barn. The 7 gooselings paraded round and round their mother. Please, 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 please take us to the fair, begged a gooseling. Then all 7 began teasing. Please, please, please. They made quite a racket. Children, snapped the goose, we're staying quietly at home. Only Wilbur is going to the fair. Just then Charlotte interrupted. I shall go too, she said softly. I have decided to go with Wilbur. He may need me. We can't tell what may happen at the fairgrounds. Somebody's got to go who knows how to write. And I think Templeton better come too. I might need somebody to run errands and do general work. I'm staying right here, grumbled the rat. I haven't the slightest interest in a fair. That's because you've never been to one, remarked the old sheep. A fair is a rat's paradise. Everybody spills food at the fair. A rat can creep out late at night and have a feast. In the horse barn you'll find oats that pacers have spilled. In the trampled grass in the infield you will find old discarded lunch boxes containing full remains of peanut butter sandwiches, hard-boiled eggs, cracker crumbs, bits of donuts, and particles of cheese. In the hard-packed midway, after glaring lights are out and people have gone to bed, you will find a variety of popcorn fragments, frozen custard dribblings, candied apples, sugar fluff crystals, salted almonds, popsicles, partly gnawed ice cream cones, and wooden sticks of lollipops. Everywhere is loot for a rat. In tents, booths, haylofts. Why, a fair has enough disgusting overleft food to satisfy a whole army of rats. Templeton's eyes were blazing. Is this true? He asked. Is this appetizing yarn of yours true? I like high living if this is what you say is true. It is true, said the old sheep. Go to the fair, Templeton. You will find that the conditions at the fair will surpass your wildest dreams. Buckets with sour smash sticking to them, tin cans containing popsicles of tuna, and paper bags stuffed with rotten. That's enough, cried Templeton. Don't tell me any more. I'm going. Good, said Charlotte, winking at the old sheep. Now then, there's no time to be lost. Wilbur will need to be put into the crate. Templeton and I must go into the crate right now and hide ourselves. The rat didn't waste a minute. He scampered over to the crate, crawled between the slats, and put straw up over him so he was hidden from sight. All right, said Charlotte, I'm next. She slung into the air, let out a dragline, and drummed gently on the ground. Then she climbed to the side of the crate and hid herself inside a knothole in the top board. The old sheep nodded. What a cargo! Zuckerman's famous pig and 2 stowaways. Look out, people are coming, said the gander. Cheese it, cheese it. The big truck with Mr. Arble was at the wheel, backed slowly down to the barnyard. Lurvy and Mr. Zuckerman walked alongside. Fern and Avery were standing in the body of the truck, hanging on to the sideboards. Listen to me, whispered the old sheep to Wilbur. When they open the crate and try to put you in, struggle. Don't go in without a tussle. Pigs always resist when they are being loaded. If I struggle, I'll get dirty, said Wilbur. Never mind that. Do as I say, struggle. If you were to walk into the crate without resisting, Zuckerman might think you're bewitched. He'd be scared to go to the fair. Templeton poked his head up through the straw. Struggle if you must, he said, but kindly remember that I'm hiding back here in this crate, and I don't want to be stepped on or kicked in the face, or crushed in any way, or squished, or buffed about, or lacerated, or scarred. Just watch what you're doing, Mr. Radiant, when they're shoving you in. Be quiet, Templeton, said the sheep. Pull in your head. They're coming. Look, Radiant, Wilbur. Lay low, Charlotte. Talk it up, geese. The truck backed slowly to the pig pen and stopped. Mr. Arble cut the motor, got out, walked to the rear, and lowered the tailgate. The geese cheered. Mrs. Arble got out of the truck. Fern and Avery jumped to the ground. Mrs. Zuckerman came walking down from the house. Everybody lined up for the fence and stood for the moment admiring Wilbur and his beautiful green crate. No one realized that the crate already contained a rat and a spider. That's some pig, said Mrs. Arble. He's terrific, said Lurvy. He looks very radiant, said Fern, remembering the day he was born. Well, said Mrs. Zuckerman, he's clean anyway. That buttermilk certainly helped. Mr. Arble studied Wilbur carefully. Yes, he's a wonderful pig, he said. It's hard to believe that he was the runt of the litter. You'll get some extra good ham and bacon, Homer, when it comes time to kill that pig. Wilbur heard the words and his heart almost stopped. I think I'm going to faint, he whispered to the old sheep who was watching. Kneel down, whispered the old sheep. Let the blood rush to your head. Wilbur sank to his knees, all the radiance gone, and his eyes closed. Look, screamed Fern, he's fading away. "Hey, watch me," yelled Avery. "I'm a pig, I'm a pig." Avery's foot touched Templeton under the straw. What a mess, thought the rat. What did I get myself into? The geese saw Avery in the crate and cheered. "Avery, you get out of that crate this instant. Who do you think you are?" "I'm a pig," cried Avery. "Oink, oink, oink." "The truck is rolling away, Papa," said Fern. The truck, with no one at the wheel, had started to roll downhill. Mr. Arble dashed to the driver's seat and pulled on the emergency brake. The truck stopped. The geese cheered. Charlotte crouched and made herself as small as possible in the knothole so Avery wouldn't see her. "Come out at once," said Mrs. Arble. Avery crawled out of the crate on his hands and knees, making faces at Wilbur. Wilbur fainted away. "The pig is passed out," said Mrs. Zuckerman. "Throw water on him." "Throw buttermilk," suggested Avery. The geese cheered. Lurvy ran for a pail of water. Fern climbed into the pen and knelt by Wilbur's side. "It's a sunstroke," said Zuckerman. "The heat is too much for him." "Maybe he's dead," said Avery. "Come out of that pig pen immediately," cried Mrs. Arble. Avery obeyed his mother and climbed out of the truck so he could see better. Lurvy returned with cold water and dashed it on Wilbur. "Throw some on me," cried Avery. "I'm hot too." "Oh, keep quiet," hollered Fern. "Keep quiet." Her eyes were brimming with tears. Wilbur, filling the cold water, came to. He rose slowly to his feet while the goose cheered. "He's up," said Mr. Arble. "I guess there's nothing wrong with him." "I'm hungry," said Avery. "I want a candied apple." "Wilbur's all right now," said Fern. "We can start, but I want to ride in the Ferris wheel." Mr. Zuckerman and Mr. Arble and Lurvy grabbed the pig and pushed him headfirst to the crate. Wilbur began to struggle. The harder the men pushed, the harder he held back. Avery jumped down and joined the men. Wilbur kicked and thrashed and grunted. "Nothing wrong with this pig." "All together now, boys. Shove." With a final heave, they jammed him into the crate. The geese cheered. Lurvy nailed some boards to the end so Wilbur couldn't back out. Then, using all their strength, the men picked up the crate, heaved it in the truck, and shoved. They did not know that under the straw was a rat, and inside the knothole was a big gray spider. They saw only a pig. "Everybody in?" cried Mr. Arble. He started the motor. The ladies climbed in beside him. Mr. Zuckerman and Lurvy and Fern and Avery rode in the buck, hanging on to the sideboards. The truck began to move ahead. The geese cheered. The children answered their cheer, and away went everybody to the fair. All right, so that's the end of that chapter. So they are on their way to the fair. But something horrible that Mr. Arble had mentioned about Wilbur was about how nice he was going to make for ham and bacon. So that made Wilbur a little nervous. So he ended up actually fainting because he was just so scared upon hearing that. So hopefully maybe while they're at the fair, Charlotte can do something magnificent and change their minds about the pig and make sure that they want to keep him, because that's Charlotte's plan all along, is for them to try and keep Wilbur so he does not get hurt. So the next book that we're going to read is called One Good Deed. And this book is just about doing good things for others. Even on sunny days, Lancaster Street seemed dark and gloomy. Neighbors did not smile at each other or talk to each other or help each other. Oh, that's kind of sad. It is very gloomy on that street. But one day, as Jake climbed his mulberry tree to pick its ripe fruit, he saw old Mrs. Thompson outside the house next door. Suddenly, he had a thought that he'd never thought before. "I bet she's sad that she can't climb trees. I could take her some of these delicious mulberries." Wow, that was nice of Jake. When Jake arrived, Mrs. Thompson was surprised. She was delighted. She had enough fruit to make 2 mulberry pies. Then she had a thought she'd never thought before. "I loved getting these mulberries. I bet Mr. Riley next door would love one of my pies." Wow, that was very kind. When Mrs. Thompson arrived, Mr. Riley was surprised. Mr. Riley was delighted. As he ate the delicious pie, he looked out the window and watched the kids next door playing ball. Suddenly, he saw a ball land on the roof of his garage. Then he had a thought that he'd never thought before. I bet I could help them. I could take my ladder and get their ball. When Mr. Riley handed them back their ball, Jeffrey and Joshua were surprised. They were delighted. As they tossed it back and forth, they saw Mr. Lee hobbling on crutches on his front door. Then they had a thought they'd never thought before. Mr. Lee can't rake the leaves in his yard, but we could. When the boys arrived with their rakes, Mr. Lee was surprised. Mr. Lee was delighted. Soon they were joined by Sammy Cohen from next door carrying a rake. My computer is broken, so I can't finish my homework. I'll help you all. Then Mr. Lee had a thought he'd never thought before. I'm good at computers. Maybe I could fix Sammy's computer. When Mr. Lee arrived, the Cohens were surprised. The Cohens were delighted. And before you knew it, the computer was up and running again. When Mrs. Cohen sat down to check her email, she looked out the window and saw Ashley from next door riding a rusty old bike. I wonder what she's going to do. Then she thought a thought she'd never thought before. We have practically a new bike that Sammy has outgrown. It would be perfect for Ashley. When Mrs. Cohen arrived with the new bike, Ashley was surprised. Ashley was delighted. She rode her new bike around the neighborhood, waving, smiling, and calling hello to her neighbors. The neighbors were surprised. The neighbors were delighted. Everyone waved and smiled right back. Soon, even on gray days, Lancaster Street seemed warm and sunny. How that happened, no one knew. Not even Jake realized that it had all began with a basket of mulberries and one good deed. The end. So see if today, if you can do one good deed for somebody in your family or a friend or a neighbor. Maybe it's going to be making them a picture and leaving it on their front porch, or helping your mom with dinner, helping your mom with some chores around the house. See if you can do a good deed for someone you know today. All right, thank you all, and I'll see you next week. Bye.